Let me turn this up just a moment. Okay, so this is going to be just a highlights of the car commercial contract. Oh, first of all, good morning. Hi, 10 and Coldwell Banker Commercial, George Realty, excuse me. But I'm only highlighting because if once I pull this up and you start looking, it's grid. And it's very similar to what we do on other grid-like contracts. So I'm only going to point out some of the differences. And as I was saying off the recording, I will start training the AIR purchase agreement, commercial purchase agreement in August. I will be sending out an email that will require people to sign up so I know how many copies and all that. I want to be prepared for that. And that will be a pretty fast 2 hours, but it's going to be split up in two. So that will be in August. So look for the email from me where I ask for you to sign up for those that are interested in having AIR purchase agreement training. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So as I said, I'm just going over the highlights. A lot of this we know. So there's the agency. It just populates like this, but I want to go over some of the stuff just to pay attention to. The grid is going to look very familiar to you, like we have in the other contracts. But don't forget to mark this and put your compensation here, because we're still having where people are forgetting to check the box and mark for their compensation. And that cannot be any higher than your buyer broker agreement, okay? And hopefully you have that prior to the writing the offer, but at the very latest, please have them sign it at the very, very latest. It should be done ahead of time, but no later than when you're making an offer, okay? So make sure that if you're doing this and you don't have it, that you get that ahead of the offer or no later than the offer, okay? So, and make sure that you put your percentage because we're still seeing that people forget that. And, you don't have to attach the BRBC to your offer. So please make sure that's filled in. Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out on this. It's a little bit different because a lot of times people are like putting that the buyer or the seller has a 1031 exchange. They have an intent to exchange. Check the boxes, whichever one's applicable, and please use the car form, and I'll show you at the end why, because there's very protective language, and it kind of gets you along to document that fact properly. So we always want to use the exchange forms. We don't want to just write in the other terms, buyer is performing a 1031 exchange. Please use the form. Check the box. Those are made by the car attorney, so they're very good to use. And I will show those to you at the end. These are just the disclosures that automatically populate. So I want to come down here. Like I said, I'm only going to go over some stuff that I think is important on this contract. Assignment of tenancies. The seller, of course, will assign all rights under any existing leases to the buyer. And in the grid section, make sure that you check that you want tenant estoppels and income and expense. You must check those boxes, okay? Because if you don't check them, you will get copies of the leases, but you won't have the tenant estoppels, which are extremely important for a lender and for the new owner. So check those boxes in the grid. Let me go back. I'm sorry, I skipped right over that. Hang on. Right here, additional tenancy documents, very important to check both of those boxes. You want income and expense statement, and you want tenant estoppel certificates, not just the leases. Why is that? The lender is going to look for tenant estoppel, even if it's a cash deal. I still recommend them because the tenant is asked to sign those and verify that, what's on that statement is true and correct. Okay. And when you're reviewing commercial leases, if they're newer leases, newer within a year or two, make sure that if there was free rent or rental abatement, as we call it, provided, make sure that rental abatement or free rent has already been expended. Okay, so when I worked for an investor, that's the first thing he would always look for, because if that free rent wasn't expended, he wanted a credit for it, right? So you need to make sure that if they gave them 3 or 4 months of free rent, that it was already expended, that was already over with. Sometimes they'll take a month and they'll spread it out. They'll do 1 month, year 1, year 2, they'll do another month, year 3, they'll do another month. So just make sure that any rental abatement has already been used up and that the new owner is not responsible for any of that abatement. Okay? It's really important. So let me come down here. Condition of the property at closing. As we know, these contracts are written in an as-is present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. So there's your as-is clause. It's in 7B. I always like to point that out because sometimes people counter that the property's as is, and you certainly can, but the contracts are written as such to be as-is contracts. And it says right here in 7C that the buyer is advised to conduct investigations of the entire property to determine what its present condition is. Okay, so make sure that you direct them. If they want to do a phase 1 survey, we do recommend it on commercial. A phase 1 environmental, you can ask the seller to pay it. Sometimes they'll counter it back for the buyer to pay, but you can certainly ask for that. So make sure that you are talking to your buyer and seeing what inspections they want to conduct. Soils, probably more on vacant land, but there are soil inspections, but certainly phase 1, okay? And if they have any old documents, I like to write in these offers that seller shall provide to buyer any prior inspection documents or tenant improvement construction plans, because that will give you some information on that property. So you would want them to provide that to you within, 5 or 10 days after acceptance so that your buyer has time to review those older documents. That's not going to negate the fact that your buyer needs to do their own investigation. So assignment of tenancies, I think we went over that. The seller does assign all rights under the existing lease and access at close of escrow. Unless otherwise agrees, then the seller is provided the keys, any password codes, or any other means of operating any locks in that building, security systems, mailboxes, etc. So when you take a commercial listing, make sure that you have a list of all this stuff, so that it's easy for you just to provide a copy to the buyer's agent, and what you're providing them, okay? Because you may have mailbox keys, but I like to have a tickler, because you'd be surprised in the heat of closing, you could forget some keys, like to a closet, a storage closet. So make sure that you know what keys you have. You've made your list so that you can turn that list over to the buyer, have them initial that they've received all of those keys. Okay. And on commercial, make sure if they have a washer and dryer room, if those are, you need to find out, are those fully owned by the seller? Are they leased? Things like that, because if those are leased, you need the contract to review it. And make sure, we had this happen once a long time ago, there was change left in from the old seller. Make sure that the change is taken out. Remind the seller if there's any change in there that's supposed to be yours, or now they're doing cards, but in the old days there was change, but make sure there's no money left in the machines that would belong to the seller. Okay, that they empty that out at close of escrow. But now they're usually using cards, okay? So the buyer is advised to investigate the insurance of the property right away. It's the same with residential. We advise that, even when you're running on that property, you're going to make an offer, have them talk to their insurance agent, begin the talk to make sure that, it's going to be okay for them to insure the building at a price that they are willing to pay.
When do you have them talk?
When I'm writing an offer, I'm already telling them, you should talk to your insurance agent. If you think you're in a huge multiple situation when it's accepted, but you'd be surprised how fast the time ticks, the 17 days. And if the thing with the insurance is a lot of times if one company's quoting too much, the buyer's scrambling trying to get quotes. So you want to make sure that you're on it from day one, so that if they want to get quotes, if they don't like one price, they have time to do that. So no appraisal contingency does not mean that if you checked for no appraisal, if the loan doesn't come in because of the appraisal, that you can't cancel because of that, because you don't have an appraisal contingency. So, in the old days, when I was new, I used to think, oh, what does it matter, because you can cancel because of the loan contingency, but you cannot. If you have checked that there's no appraisal contingency, that loan you cannot cancel because of the appraisal didn't come in on the loan. So other reasons, yes, but not the appraisal.
So you have to mark those boxes on top?
Yeah, I do not waive an appraisal contingency ever, even if it's cash. Yeah, unless the buyer says, no, 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 I insist you waive that. I want to make sure that I look really strong, then waive it. But have a discussion with them that it might be prudent to, get the value on the building. So buyer has 5 days after receipt. And I'm talking about if they revise the preliminary title. You'll see a lot of times during escrow, there's some revisions to the prelim, right?
Right.
So once you receive those prelim revisions, then the buyer has 5 days to review them.
So that's with commercial, right?
Yeah.
Revision?
Not a lot, but you'll see the revisions come in.
Okay.
But even on residential, always remember when you receive that, the buyer has 5 days. So when you receive the revisions, print it, or however you keep a hold of your documents. I'm a paper person. I write on the top when I received it, and I will print the email submittal that brought it over, so that I have evidence that this is when we got it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So you want to be careful about that. Give them their time to review it. We don't recommend that they remove contingencies with an offer, of course, unless it's a loan, because they have verified proof of funds and all that. So we do not recommend as agents that they just go ahead and remove contingencies. Of course, that is up to the buyer, but you need to have a good discussion with them. I'm not talking about a loan contingency if they have cash, okay? So items included and excluded for sale. Remember that even if they listed something in the MLS that, in the private remarks or anywhere that they were going to include, it's not included until it's in the contract. I've seen that with refrigerators. Well, it said in the MLS they were leaving the refrigerator, but if you didn't check the box, make sure that if there's something on the MLS that they said they were excluding or including, that you've documented that in your offer, so that you know what's going to be excluded or included, okay? And so items included naturally are the all existing fixtures, electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, etc. Heating fixtures, security system includes devices, hardware, software. So this one could be tricky. If there's a security system in there, those could be leased as well, right?
Right.
So make sure if you are buying something, you ask them, is the security system a leased item or does the seller own it? And is it operational? Sometimes some of the buildings are old and may no longer be operational. It's good to know those things right up top. But it should come in, their questionnaire where they give you the information. But look around the building and just make sure. The other thing is, sometimes you go and you count electric meters or gas meters, right, at a building. So you'll want to just be clued in to do that kind of thing and see if they match the units. Maybe there's a master meter, but those are just little tricks of the trade where you're counting meters at the building, or maybe ask them if there's a master meter or something like that. But they should tell you, and this is all going to be done during your due diligence. So anything that the buyer, that the seller includes in the purchase price are supposed to be owned free and clear by the seller and shall be transferred to the buyer with no warranty. So there is no warranty on any of the items per the contract that the seller transfers. Okay, so just make sure you understand that. Without seller warranty is written into paragraph 7 here, regardless of the value. So you will not have warranty on any item that is transferred with the purchase. Okay.
What if a security system is not theirs? They're not able to transfer it, huh?
Right. You got to get the lease documents. It's kind of like a solar. You
Okay.
need the lease documents. You need to see, does the buyer want to assume that lease? Is the buyer going to request the seller to cut that off?
Oh, to remove it, right?
Yeah, or they may not well, yeah, it depends on who owns the equipment too.
Right.
So you need to see that agreement and make sure that you understand that or the buyer understands it so that you can take care of that during escrow, during your due diligence period. Because there are some systems that are leased on these big buildings.
Right.
And the equipment.
That's not confirmed.
Yeah, well, some of them could be transferable, but you need to look at the contract. Yeah. And I would ask that of the listing agent, do you know if it's transferable? Even after you get the contract, just say, I'm looking at the contract, can you show me where this is transferable? Because the seller should be able to tell you. Okay. Sorry if I'm making anybody sick by scrolling. Government compliance, the seller needs to disclose to the buyer any improvements, additions, alterations, anything like that they've been made without approvals or governmental permits. So there is a questionnaire form, the commercial seller property questionnaire, that will ask the seller these questions. If you are listing a commercial property or representing a buyer, it's good if you can get this, at least this disclosure fairly quick, so you can begin looking at what they have told you about the property that they know. And it's written right here that they need to turn that over to you.
Oh, it's the commercial seller's property.
Questionnaire. Yeah, and I like those as fast as I can get them.
Right.
And then when you take your listing, if it's not too much for the seller, if you can get at least that disclosure done, it will help you greatly because you'll have answers in front of you from the seller. Okay. So tenancy related disclosures, they're going to have to give you all rental or service agreements. If there's, a gardener agreement, anything like that, you need to get vendor agreements. A lot of times, those aren't contracts, but do check. And then you're going to also want a list of who's the vendors on the building, who's maintaining the landscaping and things like that, because maybe the new buyer wants to hire them. So we want to make it as seamless for the buyer as possible. So be asking for these kind of lists. And any listing agent, if you could ask the seller for that list, that would greatly help. So you see here that it says income and expense and tenant estoppels are only going to be provided to your buyer if you check those boxes in the grid. So it's extremely important that you check these. Now, somebody will say, but they can't get the loan without the tenant estoppels. It's a condition of the loan. They may provide them with you so that you can get the loan condition met, but why not just check the box and have it a requirement of the contract up front? So, and those two boxes are really easy to miss. Changes during escrow, this is a really important one. Prior to the close of escrow, the seller may arrange the following acts, which are called proposed changes. They can rent or lease any vacant unit or other part of the premises, alter, modify, or extend any existing rental or lease agreement, enter into or modify or extend service contracts. However, at least 7 days prior to any of these proposed changes, the seller needs to deliver written notice to the buyer of these proposed changes. And within 5 days of receipt of that notice, the buyer in writing may give seller notice of buyer's objection to the proposed changes. Then in that case, the seller cannot make those proposed changes. A lot of times that falls into play more if there's vacant units, because maybe the buyer coming in wants to occupy it or lease it at current market rate. So you need to pay attention to this particular paragraph, because sometimes people forget, but any proposed changes need to be provided in writing to the buyer, and the buyer needs to approve certain proposed changes. Okay. So when you're doing a buyer's investigation, you're going to want to look for a general inspection for lead-based paint or other paint hazards, termite, things of that nature. And here it says it's reminding you that you may want to obtain a phase 1 environmental survey paid by and obtained by the party indicated in the grid. So that's a negotiable point, who pays for it. But if they have old reports, that's why I like you to write in that anything they have, they'll turn over to the buyer, because they may have an old one. Yes, you need a current one, but it's good to have a comparison too. Okay. So make sure you're asking for old reports. So the condition of the title, as you know, it's taken in its present condition and is subject to all easements, covenants, conditions, restrictions, rights, and other matter, whether of record or not, as of the date of the acceptance. And the monetary liens of record, unless the buyer has agreed to assume them, of course, are going to be handled. Okay. Very important when you get a title on any property, residential or commercial. We're not expert. We do have a lot of knowledge. I always read them. I don't care if it looks squeaky clean to me. I call that title officer. I call them. I say, I've looked at the title. Is there anything you need to point out to me that I need to be looking for? Or is there any liens that maybe I don't see or that you can tell me about? So have your title officer review it with you for free. They will be happy to. Camilla?
So you're not calling the title rep, you're calling the officer?
No, I call the officer. I call right in, and it's right on the right-hand side of all of the title.
Yeah.
I always call the officer, even if I don't notice something, because they'll say, oh, wait a minute, down here, did you see that? And the other thing I always tell you guys, have probably heard me 100 times say this, it's free. When you talk to that title officer, ask for plotted easements.
Yeah.
Get that plotted easement, make that always, even on residential, a part of your disclosure package. You want to know where those easements on that property are, and it'll come ... It'll show you on the plotted easements where they're at.
They'll put it in red or something.
Yeah, they put it in red. So if you need something printed in color, let me know, but have your buyer initial that, please.
Is that the seller's responsibility or the buyer's responsibility? Buyer's agent responsibility?
Well, they don't have to provide you the plotted easement, but when you're representing a buyer, I always ask for it, because
Seller.
yeah, or the seller. For me, it's just part of my routine, because, you know, if it's going through the middle of the yard, I don't know, you know, maybe they want to know about it, and it's free. It takes a moment. You'll get it within 2 days, usually, when you request it. You got to give them a little bit of time. So don't do it at close of escrow. Yeah. Do it during your contingency periods.
Sure.
Yeah.
I thought the lien would go through escrow. Escrow officer would notify you, hey, this and that.
The lien does go through, but you still need to review the title report with the buyer needs to review it. You should help them by calling the title officer and asking them if there's anything they need to point out. Is there anything additionally that the buyer's going to need to provide to title, not to escrow, to title, to close?
Yeah.
You know?
It's a check verify, basically.
Yeah.
You're having the title officer go ahead and zoom in on that just one report.
Mhm. Yeah. And there may be something that you need to provide title. Don't wait till the last minute. I like to call right away, because, oh, I didn't know I was going to need to get that. Let me work on getting that for you. So you're not delaying any of your time periods.
So you don't say, oh,
Yeah, I didn't know. So the buyer is, according to this contract, the buyer is going to receive a standard coverage CLTA policy of title insurance. An ALTA policy or the addition of endorsements may provide greater coverage, but of course there's more expense to that. So I'll leave that to you to check into it with your favorite title officer if they think that's necessary. I normally just let it flow to the CLTA policy on these, but when we're training on AIR, it's not a preliminary title, it is a title commitment, which is a deeper dive into the title.
oh, wow.
So there's a lot of differences. They're not massive. Once we're in the training in August, you'll see, and you'll have a list. Because I'm going to tell you, when we're reviewing that contract, I'm going to say on that paragraph, put an E for escrow, meaning you keep that and you ask escrow for that. So it's not going to be hard because you're going to have your roadmap.
So that's a title.
Title commitment. Yeah. So notice a buyer or seller to perform. Here it's 2 days, pretty standard. And on this contract, they have the final verification of property. Just use your VP on the commercial as well, okay? And compensation, make sure that you have it's per separate agreement. Make sure you have your BRBC. Make sure you have put your percentage into this offer. And they may counter you, but make sure you know what your commission's going to be. And you cannot collect commission above your BRBC amount from any sources combined. It only can equal the BRBC.
What if they don't give you that amount? What do you do?
You decide if you're going to continue on with that buyer. You can try to counter it. Sometimes they will counter you down. I've seen it multiple
What about
times.
the seller? Because if you ask the seller to pay the composition, they'll say, okay, we'll just pay this amount.
Right. And okay, so once you submit your offer, that's going to come back to you in a counter what the
Right.
seller's willing to pay.
Right.
And at that point, you make a decision.
So do you tell the buyer? You need
It
to come
depends
up-
on how you wrote the BRBC. There's a checkbox at the bottom of the form that says that the buyer cannot pay the commission.
Okay.
If you check that, they're not
They're
liable
not
for nothing.
anything. Okay.
But you still have, some people thought, oh, I checked that, so I don't need the percent. You still need the
Still-
percent in. Yeah. So if you put in 3%, the seller only paid you 1.5. If you didn't check the box, then the buyer will pay 1.5. Okay. So I thought this was interesting because I'm always re-looking over things. They even have a paragraph here when you make an amendment. I know you were just working on one. You have 3 days after mutual execution to deliver that to escrow. So the contract on this commercial agreement even gives you a time frame for that.
Okay.
Okay. So make sure, don't hold those. Make sure you get those over to your escrow officer. The assignment and nomination, the buyer has the right to assign to the buyer's interest in this agreement to a wholly owned corporation, LLC of their own. But if they're bringing in another buyer, then they need to get the seller's permission to bring in that buyer.
So it's
assignment.
It's not on the contract already that they could assign it?
Yeah, they can assign it, but the seller needs to do a look at that new buyer. Yeah, they'll probably ask for, qualifications and things like that. We just went through an assignment. What did they ask for? They asked for proof of funds. They asked, how were they paying? In this case, it was cash, so that was simple to verify. And then we moved on with the assignment.
So when they assume the contract, it's the same terms
Yes.
and the same closing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all negotiable. Like if the new buyer says, hey, I'm going to need 10 more days to get my legs under me, then
Right.
sometimes the seller will negotiate. It just depends on the seller and their motivation. Yeah.
Okay. So if they say they needed phase 2 to be done, it's up to the seller to agree to it, or?
Yeah, because and it depends on where you're at in the contract, right?
Okay,
Because you are literally taking over where that buyer left off. Are all the contingencies already up? The one we were working on, the contingencies weren't up and all the inspections continued on in the
okay,
background.
right,
And then the new buyer was reviewing them. Yeah, and then they even actually paid for some of those inspections because the old buyer was going to pay.
right.
So they went ahead and paid for them. So it
The new-
depends on, where you're at in the contract. And Americans with Disability Act, I just want to point out to you that that can get kind of expensive. So compliance with the ADA may require significant costs. Monetary remedies may be incurred if the property is not in compliance. We're not expert at that, so we can't advise to that. You can have a licensed contractor or somebody of that nature look at the building and let you know. You can check with the city. The buyer and seller, they advise them to contact a California real estate attorney or a contractor, architect, engineer, or other qualified professionals. So you can point them first to the city, but don't advise them on ADA stuff because that's so tricky. But that's a biggie on buildings, right? So you just want to make sure that when they are doing their inspections, you can mention, is your contractor going to look for ADA compliance, because we don't know about that, because the things change and then, the bathrooms may change, just a
Right.
lot of stuff. But if you mention it, you write it in an email, oh, I know you're having your inspection. Will your contractor or your inspector also be looking at ADA compliance?
Can you put it on the contract?
It's here.
No, will your contractor be looking for ADA compliance?
I would write it. No, you don't. You have to write it in an email because it's part of your due diligence.
Okay,
Yeah.
Let's say, we deal with the apartment houses, 4 unit or more, it's commercial, right?
No,
4
4 units is still residential, 5+,
That's a 4 unit, they would.
5+,
Commercial,
5+ is commercial.
so you have to apply, go by the ADA rules. You have to
Well-
provide a handicap.
I don't know.
but
See,
you have to ask the city.
yeah, the
Yeah.
city has to
I mean,
tell
like,
you. Because I would never answer that because
Right.
here's my answer. I don't know. But here's what I do know. You should be looking at this. You should check with the city. And also since we're talking about checking, the buyer can go to the city counter and check some information,
Yeah,
You don't do it for them because what if you didn't get all the information? Let them do it. If you want to drive them there and sit in the background, which I've had to do before, I just sat in a chair. Let them do all the asking, okay? So that's going to conclude this. I just wanted to go over some things on this contract, but I want to show you guys these great forms, the buyer or seller intent to exchange. So
right.
make sure you use these if you are going. Yeah, you got to be careful. But it's not being any more careful than we always are. We tell them to get a licensed professional to inspect the building.
Right.
Yeah. So here's these forms, buyer's intent to exchange, which you would check if you're going to exchange. And here's the important part. Failure to exchange if the buyer is unable through no fault of the buyer to complete the transfer of the other property. There's some options here, 4 of them. This transaction shall close on escrow date without the extension of time, or you check the box, this close of escrow for this transaction shall be extended how many more days, or this transaction shall be canceled and buyer's deposit returned, or there's an other box. This form is extremely important because it was written by the lawyers. So when you want to do an exchange, and that's the same thing on residential, if you have somebody buying units with an exchange, make sure you attach these forms. Don't write your own words because you want the protection of how this was written, okay? So I just wanted to point that out. There's a buyer and a seller one as well. Buyer's intent and seller intent to exchange, okay?
So Michelle, if they're doing a 1031 exchange, when do they have to give you the company that they're using to give it to escrow?
Well, I like it as soon as possible, but I've seen it as late as 10 days after acceptance. Yeah, but do tell the escrow officer, hey, they're, working a 1031 exchange. If you email the exchange company to that escrow officer, they will start making contact fairly quick. Yeah, they start going fairly quick and talking to that exchange company.
Okay.
And usually they'll CC the agent and the buyer in those exchanges that, unless the buyer doesn't want you seeing everything, then they'll only CC the buyer.
What if they can't do the 1031 exchange?
That's why this form's really important.
Do they still have to close the escrow?
It depends on how you wrote this form. Because this is, now you've made this, you've attached it to the
Right.
offer. And if failure to exchange, you could check C. If they cannot exchange through no fault of the buyer, then the transaction shall be canceled and the buyer's deposit shall be returned to the buyer, and all parties are released from further obligation. So, but you're still going to do a cancellation of escrow. You're going to go through the other paperwork, the normal paperwork. But that's why I don't like when people just write, buyers doing a 1031 exchange. Use the forms because they're there to protect all parties.
So letter C is the get out card, right?
Yeah.
Basically.
But you have to, it can't just be, oh, willy-nilly, it has to, you know what I mean? There has to be backup. Yeah. So make sure you're using any car form you can use on your contracts because they're written specifically to protect all parties. And I can't stress enough, use a TOPA, not on commercial, but I want to say it again. I just saw another transaction. When you have residential 1 to 4, you have tenants, I don't care if it's Uncle Joe in the house, use a TOPA, the tenant occupied property addendum, because that is very protective of all of you.
So it's TOPA?
Yeah, then that's for tenants inside of residential 1 to 4. Even if it's a non-paying relative, use a TOPA. Okay,
That will,
it's protective of all parties.
so say who's in there or what?
Yeah, and
Do
it's
you have a copy of it?
yeah. Let me pull it up.
Oh, tenant occupied.
So this is resident. Well, now I'm skipping around, but when I think of things, because this is one thing I always think, oh, you guys, we need to use this. So here's your tenant occupied a property addendum. Okay, is the property going to be delivered vacant? If that is so, then you check the box, okay? Or you leave it defaulted to tenants to remain in possession, okay? But if you check that you're going to deliver the unit vacant, make sure you understand the laws, make sure you're not acting as an attorney and giving advice, use an eviction attorney, whatever you need, but don't talk like an attorney unless you are an attorney, because the tenant laws are very confusing.
Especially LA City.
Yeah. So here, if you check this, whatever unit number is going to be vacant, put there. If the seller exercises in good faith attempts and subject to applicable law, is unable to remove an existing tenant by close of escrow or 5 days prior, the buyer may cancel this agreement, okay? And buyer's sole remedy shall be the return of their deposit. Okay, so
that gives the buyer a way out.
it gives the buyer a way out and it's protective of the seller.
Oh.
Because we've all heard of these cases where the tenant in a residential unit will not budge, even with thousands of dollars being offered. So always, always, always use the TOPA when you're dealing with any tenancies, even free ones of a relative in your property. You want to document that that's going to be delivered vacant.
You could
Okay.
use that with the commercial or no?
No, 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 no. This is only residential.
Residential?
Yeah. But I've seen a lot of these when there's tenants and people aren't using them. And I think just to avoid like huge problems. I just heard of a payout of 175 to get somebody out of a unit in LA, and this was quite a few years ago. I was listening to that going, okay, TOPA, TOPA, TOPA in my mind because back then this wasn't available. So always make use of your TOPA. It's going to protect you. Okay. So are there any questions? I'm going to stop the share. If you have any questions, shoot them. And then I will, if not, I'm going to be sending out by the end of next week the sign up for the purchase agreement for AIR. I prefer you in person for that because there's so much detail, but I will open it up to Zoom as well. So no problem if you can't make it in. Don't worry, we got you covered. But I'm going to go ahead and send out the sign up sheet. And then we will have a 2-hour session on that. We'll be split into 2 trainings in Fridays in August. I'll pick 2 Fridays and we'll go through the whole purchase agreement. Then in September, we'll start on the leases because remember, commercial leasing commissions are wonderful. In some of those, you can make as much as you do on a commission on a residential property. Okay. So that will be coming up August and September. So thank you all. I always appreciate your time and it is my great honor to be here with you.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
Michelle, is that 2 hours straight or are you gonna break it?